Hello and welcome to dMTable. I'm M, and this is Worldbuilding series. Worldbuilding like the greats. But I have thought about it and thought to myself, so wait, if these are all the ways to worldbuild, check out the playlist, what are the ways to not worldbuild? I should perhaps warn you of what makes for unsuccessful worldbuilding as well. Because there is such a thing, and anybody who has been at it for a bit knows that, oh boy, is there ever such a thing. Frequently, worldbuilding, even for people who have done it for decades like me, can end up in that direction where you've world-built a highly detailed setting, and it's completely useless for anything and everything that you might have imagined that you'll be doing with it. It cannot go into the campaign as intended, it cannot go into a game, it's just useless, you realize eventually. Why? Well, one of the first and most important things to know about the mistakes, the first biggest mistake, is when you start world building and you just sort of do what kind of a first-timer would think world building means, and that is you pick up a country or a castle or something and you start writing history for it. That is exactly how not to world build. That is basically, as far as I can tell, never how to world build. Of course, it's in human nature for many of you to immediately, and possibly me if I were a viewer and not the one making the video, to say to yourself, inside of yourselves right now, well, I take that as a challenge. You suck. Well, okay, I'm just trying though to convey the biggest mistake. It doesn't mean it's a rule, it just means that it's the biggest, most nastiest pitfall that I have ever seen in world building. World building isn't writing history. In fact, retelling history, even for our mundane Earth, is quite a challenge, so that one is both not biased, which is an infinite challenge, but also for one to be interesting and useful in retelling, so that it's more than boring names and dates and things that reshuffle, which is how many represent history, which is how we were mostly taught in school, which sucks and is bad, and I've seen it done much better since by people on YouTube, which is ridiculous given that YouTube is sort of initiated thing, whilst schools are official for like all world. Therefore, most of us have a wrong impression about history. But even if we now stop talking about history, the problem remains. We have wrong impression about building up to a world, because we have been taught history in the most boring manner known to a human being. So, now, that's the first mistake. How to approach world building is not by just trying to emulate there being a place and you being a, historian of the mundane kind, and making a even further sub-mistake of trying to be a realistic historian of the thing, because that means that you're just copying people who did this bad impression to you in a bad way, in the wrong category, because whoever did that sort of writing and teaching was getting money to be there, not to be good, not to be a writer, but to be one who puts the shapes on paper to say that they did it, essentially, more or less. I may feel a bit upset by this, maybe unreasonably so, maybe not, but that's because I've disliked history for most of my life, and then I like it now a lot because I've seen people actually show how fun history and revealing it can be, which just doesn't seem like, it seems like I changed psychologically to anybody who's in my previous place. It just doesn't seem real, that history will be fun, that it will be on par with, good fantasy novels and such. But when you hear how wild stuff on Earth was, is, and can be from a more usable, cool source, then you have lots to work with, especially if you're a world builder. But again, I'm not really here, despite my rant, to discuss and debate this. Sorry for even getting this far. It's just what enforces the first mistake. Now, second mistake is thinking that world building is about getting a world described and done. No, world building is about finding a great world to ponder upon, think about, and use in examples for some sort of interesting, fun thing that you want to do with it. It's much different than writing history, and it's even more different than trying to imitate that you're writing history. It is about finding a setting that engrosses you and everybody else who touches upon it. Not a setting that bores everybody except you who touches upon it, and even you eventually. Because what I have noticed is that dates, locations, and events as listed such, they do not make for anything fun or interesting. You want dynamics, mechanics, ideas, abilities, situations, plots, subplots, and so on that evoke emotional response or evoke inquisitiveness and desire to participate, learn, do something. I mentioned very many times on my channel activity loops, but that's just one. So that's desire to do. Desire to participate is when those activity loops are well described, or when mystery is also fun to be a part of. And in many other ways, not just by mystery or by work or activity, but sometimes by philosophy or love or friendship or whatever you want, whatever the player wants to experience in a world for themselves. This is the way to world build. Not realizing this is not the way to world build. When you realize that you want to achieve a response of desire, then your whole target shifts. Now you are making a desire trap and not a recollection of locations and people. Locations, they need to be evocative, either visually, descriptively, or whatever, not due to them being so-and-so part of such and such world, but because each individual location brings something beautiful and wonderful and new and awesome to the table that makes the world more worth it. Think of it like this: time investment. Anybody who's gonna world build, or anybody who's gonna listen to world building unveil to them, which is to say any audience to any world building, they need to spend more time than you are likely thinking about when you're world building, if you're doing it for the first several times. You need to respect how much time you're gonna spend on this, how much time you're gonna waste on this if you fail, and how much time nobody else will want to spend on this if you fail, and how much time people, most crucially, how much time people do spend when you succeed. People that will love and respect your world that you world built will do so for decades, unfailingly, if you do it right. Nobody wants to sit for 2 hours for anything if you do it wrong. Because at that point, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of energy, it's not as filled out content as you would want to have. As such, you are building a desire trap. Make sure your trap has good lures, good snapping mechanisms, good hooks, good pitfalls into the extra and the marvelous, the surprises, the anticipations, the revelations, the intrigues, the circumstances, the propositions. Think of each of those words carefully. Each of them is a world of desire all of its own that you can build upon. Find a kind of world that most exemplifies you not wasting your time and energy, but rather having as much of these enjoyable elements explode into wondrous usability of each of those concepts. So, if you have both love and friendship and combat and architecture and mystique and philosophy and mystery and travel and hobby of some sorts, all of those things, each of those keywords, you need to have a well-flowing, slick, elaborated method of catching people into the flow of that thing, and then all those things should work in synergy with each other and not fight for room. They should all work at the same time, or at a similar enough time, or with similar enough overlap, or with enough space to work smoothly, rather than becoming too spread out to actually catch up to them. And they all need to be either available up front to participate in, or to have good routes to promise of that, so that you are not expositioning day one of exposition of something that you've prepared 152 days of exposition, which nobody will get past the day 3 because the day 1, 2, and 3 did not promise the days 4 to 152. You need to promise, you need to grab, you need to involve, you need to kick into, you need to appropriate, you need to get them invested, you need to get things going, you need to get things very much out there in numerous ways. 1 way isn't enough, 2 ways isn't enough. 3 ways might start becoming enough, but you should shoot for as much as you can sort of reasonably grab and hold at the same time. It makes it still wieldable for you as a creator to have flow within your game, your campaign, whatever. And as long as those things flow between each other, into each other, promising each other, building upon each other, then you have a thick world that you have now room to elaborate on the names of places, on the locations of places, and that sort of completely trivial, unimportant stuff that only should really crop up after you know why you're building so many things, where those things lead, how those things work, what emotional responses do those things create in others and yourself, and how to be very, very, very powerful with them. Because just because, say, some sort of king was ruling then and was betrayed and such, no matter how much touching Arthurian story you have at the core of this, if this is all that the audience hears for a long while, this is not emotionally compelling, not useful, not anything. If you can't get your audience to first run into thick promise of emotion immediately of your, say, Arthurian legend, then your legend is not existent to anybody but you. And you haven't retold it, and you're unable to. So you have to rethink the approach in that case. So how would you do that? Well, you need to see what kind of narrative gives immediately those several keywords right to the players and the audience. How do they get to participate? How do they get to ponder? How do they get to be relevant in it? Nobody's gonna care unless they're relevant to it or it is relevant to them. How does it become relevant to them? As I said, it needs to have skills, abilities, things that they can either get or use on it, or other things that may involve or concern them, like love interests, like a friendship, like capacity to be there and do that, or this thing like travel, or see things that are much more than you usually get in other places or in other settings. Not necessarily by scale, but by impact. That's how you get things to be relevant to them. But how do you get them to be relevant to the thing? Well, make them involved if you construct it well. That is harder, but if, for that Arthurian example I mentioned, if you have them be the knights of the round table that have, say, reincarnated into the future, and they somehow have a clue about this, then you might be onto something. But only if you tell them what investment they would have in it, like what activity and what promise of depth, intrigue, power, awesomeness, fate, destiny, ties, and so on. You know, all that fun stuff that's much more fun when not called out this bluntly. Which of those things, how many of those things is directly promised to them as being one of these knights? And the story about the king, how emotional does this make them if they were participants in it somehow? They needn't be confirmed, they can doubt, they can suspect that they've been actors in that, as long as there's a chance that they were, and as long as the story is immediately told, at least to an extent where it evokes a powerful emotion in them because of them. Them wondering, could they help? Are they guilty? Can they profit from it? Will they get more powerful? Will they get to know something awesome? Will they prove themselves? Is it a great challenge? Is it interesting to do it together? Is it a good test of friendship? Is it a interesting way to express their values, etc.? And then how do you propose that the king is close to them? Is it because of extreme glory of the position? Is it because the king was a great and dear friend to them? How can you do that? Don't say it, but rather you have to make it so that it's true. As a narrator, you would have to make it so that if your angle is king is a great friend of theirs, you have to, as they say, sell that story to them. And not say, well, the king was a great friend to you, now he was betrayed, who has done it? No. You have to sell the concept of king being their close and dear friend, and then sell the concept of nobody has expected this, but somebody has backstabbed this whole situation and ruined a group of friends, unless the friends can gather up together again and fight to find the traitor and resurrect the king. That sort of investment. You need to make a trap and get them vastly, deeply invested and entangled into the campaign. And that's how you do the world building. And how not to do the world building is to I'll not know any of this and try to just say the list of these things without making these things be true to the observers. Also forgetting to involve them, because that is the greatest mistake. Number 3, I guess, is that people will often think that world building, due to the title world building, has nothing to do with the players, with you, and with characters as much, and will therefore be participating in building up buildings, kingdoms, places, dates. Sometimes a bit of culture, a bit of agriculture, a bit of family crests and politics. But no, that's all of that stuff is useful only when it is later usable by some of these first things. Well, there. If you were new, now you no longer are. Even if you completely disagree with me, you have at least gotten a completely solid way to push yourself off into a direction, as opposed to hearing the word world building and falling into the obvious misconceptions. If there are questions or you want to correct me on something, please do write. I would love to hear from you, even if you have some critiques. I'm M, and this was dMTable. If you found it useful or unique, maybe you can spare me a click, and I could see you some other week, because every other week I make more such things just for you. See you then. Bye.